Like, it's dangerous. And we have to just know we're on our journey, other people are on theirs, and they don't need to look the same, and they probably won't.
All right, this is What's Your Passion? I am Chad Sinkowski, your host, and I aspire to inspire others through people like my guest today, Erik Reagan. He's a CEO of Focus Lab in Savannah, Georgia. Erik, welcome.
Thanks, man.
And thank you for allowing me to come into your place.
Of course, of course.
All right. I just want to start today and tell me a little bit about Focus Lab. What do they do?
Yeah. We are a brand agency, so we help mostly B2B tech-focused companies with their branding, which involves at kind of a core level things like their logo, the typography or fonts that they use. It's the visual ways they communicate with their customers, and then the verbal ways that they communicate. So what's their name? We tend to partner with naming companies to make sure the name fits the brand that they're looking to kind of portray and become if they are early on in their journey. But we also advise them on how to speak about themselves so that it gives creates the type of environment and even connection to their customers that they're trying to create. So we work on these branding principles with them, and then they take those things out into the wild and put them to work, basically. So we work predominantly with brand new companies who don't have any of those things, or a company that's at a stage in their existence where they really are questioning, do they look the way they need to? Do they sound the way they need to most effectively communicate with their audience? And if they're in a pivotal season, we'll connect with them, or they'll connect with us, and we'll rebrand them to get them into the next best place that they can be to do those things with their customers.
Okay, that sounds like it's pretty complicated and in-depth. So my next question is, where did you get your start? Because obviously that wasn't overnight. Where did you start, and how did you get involved in creating Focus Lab?
Yeah, when Focus Lab started, we also did website development and design. We don't do any kind of coding any longer. But how I personally got started was with coding. And so in my middle school years, basically my dad said, "Here, try this HTML thing out, son. You probably will like it." And he was right. I enjoyed it. So for those moments where I was just kind of trying to explore hobbies as a kid, building websites became kind of a hobby. I also had this hobby of music. I came up in a musical family, and I really enjoyed music. And so I had these two hobbies kind of side by side. And of course, you get to this late high school age, and everybody says, "What are you going to do next? Where are you going to go to school? Or what are you going to go do?" And so I was trying to choose between this technology interest and this music interest, and music was definitely the much bigger interest at the time. And so I actually started school with a focus in music, got about a year into that and realized it's not for me right now. And I flipped the focus, if you will, to computer science, but never took a computer science class. I actually dropped out before I could. And I had actually been tinkering with these website things and projects for a little while, and then eventually turned into freelancing as a freelance web developer. And while I was freelancing, I met my eventual business partner, and we came together and eventually created Focus Lab. And so at the start, I was the coding side of Focus Lab, and he was the design side. And we have evolved a good bit since then, but that is kind of Focus Lab's origin. We were mostly designing and building websites and doing a little bit of brand stuff, and we grew into this emphasis on brand. And now we've really honed in on just doing that.
Okay. Now, speaking of your co-founder, Bill, can you speak to, there was some somewhat recent changes, you kind of stepping, I don't want to say down, or redirecting yourself from CEO to COO.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What was the advantage of doing that, maybe for the company and even yourself, or for the whole team?
Yeah. To answer that, I think, I kind of need to go backwards to get us caught up. So when we started, kind of maybe extending the last question almost, we started just the two of us. We'd never been in business before. We didn't know anything about business. We kind of just knew our craft. I was good at building things with code. He was good at designing things. that delivered a message effectively to an audience. And so we stumbled into being a business almost.
Right.
And so as we got into this, we were learning about running a business and growing a business while we were still practicing and delivering kind of things through our craft. And over time, as demand grew, as we needed to hire people, we eventually realized, okay, somebody should kind of be at the helm. And it, for quite a while, was both of us, which is not a great answer, but right. it worked for us. We made it work. We got to a point in our size, in our age, where we realized, okay, we actually do need to signify and choose basically someone to be CEO. And up until this point, we had no CEO. We're maybe 7 or 8 years old, had never had a CEO title. And it always felt weird because we were, fewer than 20 people. Like, what's the CEO of a company of less than 20 going to even do?
Right.
Like everyone knows that person really wears like 6 hats, not just one. And we didn't really care too much about titles, but we got to a point where we realized, okay, we need to adopt a commitment to someone being kind of the visionary of this business. And at the time, we had a third partner who had recently joined us. He'd been here for a number of years in a different role, and then he bought into ownership of Focus Lab. And the three of us were trying to talk about who is the right CEO for Focus Lab. And I kind of just broke the silence and said, I think it's me. And here are some of the reasons I think it's me. And so for a time, it was me. I was the CEO. And during that time, we also made some decisions, not during that conversation, but over time after that decision. We had some conversations that led to us refining what we did for customers. And we actually removed code, which was the thing that was my half. Right. That was like my half of why we existed was code. And now we've decided to remove it. And that was one of the key ingredients that eventually led to me saying to Bill, hey, I think you might be the better CEO for this new version of us. And the way I got to that was I'm not just in the day-to-day of Focus Lab, but I also am an owner of Focus Lab. And so if I think about it as an asset, if I think about the owner perspective of a business, I want to make sure that everyone in this company is in the right seat. And if I looked at myself as CEO, I was like, I don't think that's the right person for that seat, even though I'm thinking about myself. And I was thinking, I think now that we've made these changes, it makes a lot more sense for Bill to be the CEO because he was the design half. He's so much more passionate about branding than I am. I have different interests and passions at this point as it relates to Focus Lab. And so we just acknowledged that and said, yeah, it's time to make a change. And it might sound kind of weird because I'm sort of demoting myself, at least from a perception perspective. Right. But that's kind of how we got to that.
And I think it'd be difficult because somebody could as CEO, they could make a decision to say, okay, this person is in the proper role. We need to move them. And then when it's yourself, right, it really says if you're actually looking at it to make the company better. Yeah. Because you're moving yourself out of that position, right? Yeah. It's kind of selfless. Yeah. Right? You're not saying only me, focusing on yourself. Yeah. When I know you mentioned about titles, you have maybe some beliefs about titles. A lot of times people get stuck on the title of CEO or president or whatever it may be and feel that if they don't have a title, then they don't give any type of anything to the organization, that they're not contributing. Can you talk a little bit about titles and maybe they're not so important?
Yeah. We have an interesting culture where broad brushstroke here, we put a lot of value in job titles. And if you don't know your own value, depending on how you understand your value as a person, you might connect it heavily to your title and your role or your station in life. And if you work somewhere where you seldom get recognition or where your work is often unseen, you almost have to default to your job title as the indication of your value. And that's really dangerous, I think. But it's also really common. I also found it really difficult to provide accurate titles as a small business because so many people wear multiple hats when you're a small company.
Right.
So titles, I've always had this like tension of belief with titles because I understand they have a good place. They communicate things both externally to customers or to the external world. They also communicate things internally to a team, to teammates, to coworkers and whatnot. But they can be so tricky to get, quote, right. And if a person has what I would conceive of as an unhealthy relationship to their job title, where that's where they derive their value, then it's going to be a rough time.
Right.
And I got to say, I've felt this way for a while. And yet, when I decided I'm the CEO, it felt like some kind of way. Like I was like, I'm a CEO now. I hadn't felt anything about that title until, for whatever reason, we decided it was mostly an external thing. And when we made that initial decision, but I was like, wow, that feels different. Just saying, well, I'm the CEO of Focus Lab.
Yeah. And I could understand where people could almost define themselves like who they are. And I can only do this based on my title. Right. So if they have ideas outside of that, they might not even share them because they feel, nope, this is my title. This is who I am. And I can't be anything else. Right. Which could be detrimental. Yeah.
And it also depends on the culture that they find themselves in, the work culture. Some cultures are great about tearing down perceived boundaries that titles might create or department names might create, and people can go and add commentary to someone else's team or department or what have you. But a lot of cultures are like, oh, no, you stay over there where you stay in your lane.
Now, talking about roadblocks or hurdles along the way, could you talk about maybe some that you had along the way and how you overcame them?
I've had plenty of roadblocks because I was coming from a place of complete ignorance when it comes to building a business or growing any kind of business. I think one of my roadblocks was almost in the same way an opportunity, and it was that I had no experience in doing business. Without having that experience, I both didn't know what I didn't know, but I also wasn't restricted by common practices, if you will. But experience was definitely a roadblock with quite a few areas of business. And I would say that the most helpful kind of piece of advice that I had that helped me kind of get through a series of roadblocks comes from a guy named Ken Blanchard. He's most popular probably for a book series called The 1 Minute Manager. And one of the books in that series is called Self-Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager. He might touch on this concept in other books, but this is where I was introduced to it. He talks about what he calls assumed constraints. And some people will call these false beliefs. There are other terms for it. But I'd say this was a roadblock of mine, this idea of an assumed constraint. It's assuming that I have some type of limitation around me or on me. And reading that book helped me start to question that a little bit. So things like, well, do I actually need experience to try this thing out? Is anybody going to stop me if I want to try this thing without having done it before? Probably not. Why don't I just try it? So my mentality, my mindset was probably one of the biggest roadblocks that I had earlier on. And Ken Blanchard kind of unlocked that and said, no, get that assumed constraint out of the way.
Right.
And that was really helpful. So it's not so much a tangible roadblock that I'm describing. It's a little bit more mindset related.
Yeah, mindset. I like that because I also like this. Orville Wright didn't have a pilot's license.
There you go.
Right. It's people. Yeah, they'll make their own roadblocks, mental roadblocks, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're assuming that no, I can't do this or I can't do that. And I mean, that's where it all starts is with yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And so what would you say keeps you strong on your path, no matter what you're doing? What keeps you strong and going forward?
Simon Sinek popularizes this phrase, start with why or know your why.
Right.
And I think knowing kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing is a very grounding, centering thing for me. And even to the degree of helping me through this CEO transition, all I had to do was remind myself of why I do what I'm doing to know that, oh, that's absolutely the right decision. And for me, it has a lot to do with how I can impact an individual person. And part of the way that that comes to fruition at Focus Lab is I want to create a fantastic place to work. I want Focus Lab to be an amazing place to work. That gives me a lot of fulfillment. It gives me energy when I don't have energy. And if I feel like I've kind of gone off path a little bit, reorienting around that reason, that purpose, that why is really, really helpful for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any daily or morning routines that you could speak to?
Yes. I wish I could attribute this. Someone older, smarter, maybe deader than me has probably written about it somewhere. It's probably a method of some kind. But one of the most important parts of my routine is that I start today yesterday, or I started today yesterday. So in my evening, basically, I am looking at the next day. One of the things that does for me is it helps me to not find myself lying in bed thinking about the next day with questions that I feel like I need to answer. I'll have already looked a little bit into tomorrow's plan, and I have those things answered basically in a nutshell. That helps me stay kind of at ease and just able to sleep, if you will. And then when I start my morning, I'm not trying to organize my day. I actually am just off to the races.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So starting tomorrow today is sometimes how I phrase it, or same thing. I started today yesterday. It just depends on how I'm talking about it to a given person. That is one of the most helpful things for me. In the morning, I tend to spend some time reading before I'm working. A big part of all of my life is my faith, and so in that reading, it's often in scripture, in prayers that someone else wrote, or just spending time praying on my own. Part of my wall in my home office is basically prayer reminders, things I'm praying for actively. That's an active and important part of my morning routine before I'm into kind of work mode. And then one last thing I can mention at the end of the workday, it's going to sound like I already mentioned it, but it's distinctly different. At the end of the workday, I will plan the next workday. And that's kind of related to what I do a few hours later when I'm actually like trying to get ready for bed and whatnot.
Right.
But literally at the task level, I'm writing out, I'm reviewing the calendar. What appointments do I have tomorrow? And what are my top 3 things that I have to do tomorrow? That's kind of how I think of it, is the top 3 things. And as long as I have that clarity, I usually do that the last 15 minutes of my workday, wherever that may fall on a given day. And that also helps me be present with my family when I'm off of work. I put some of these things in air quotes because I work from home. Right. I'm at home all the time. And it's so important that when I step out of that home office that I can be present with my family. So if I go ahead and just knock out my tomorrow plans for work right then, and then give myself some time gap before I'm in my family mode, I have such a better track record of being present with my family. And then the thing I do in the evening is more about the whole day, not just the work tasks that might be ahead.
Right. Yeah, I can see the advantages of that, because so many people, they leave work, they haven't planned for the next day. They're thinking about what they were doing or what's going to come tomorrow when they're supposed to have family time, right? Yeah. And they're not present. And then I know, like, even for myself, the simplest things, like having my food ready the next day, having my coffee ready or whatever, having the clothes picked out. You know, Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day because he didn't have to pick anything out. He didn't have to make a decision first thing in the morning, like, what am I going to wear? Nope, it's that right there every day.
Yeah.
And then I can make decisions about everything else, because every time you make a decision, it gets harder and harder to make more decisions throughout the day, you know? I recently saw something that you had posted on LinkedIn about CEOs or leaders taking a month off of work or even more. Can you talk about the advantages? I mean, I think a lot of people would think, no, you're supposed to work every single day nonstop. If you own a business, if you're leading a business or a team, there's no time for taking that much time off. You know?
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's funny. There's almost like two opposite perspectives that I've heard so far. It's the hustle culture perspective that you just described, where you're always on, you're always available, you're setting that standard for your business, so you're expected to be that. And then there's almost like the lavish CEO lifestyle, where it's like, yeah, I'm going to be gone for months at a time, and that's just what I can do. But what I aim for with what I was sharing and the stuff that I kind of coach people through creating as entrepreneurs is it's more about building a business that doesn't rely heavily on you, which should be indicated by your ability to be gone for a month at a time. So it's an easy way to frame a downstream benefit of work that you do upstream that makes your business work without you, function without you. Especially in small businesses, the founders are often central to the operation. And if they can't be gone, if I can't be gone from Focus Lab for more than 3 or 4 weeks at a time without any communication, then I probably have some things I can fix in my business. Because if I'm relied on so heavily that I can't go through even a single month cycle of business, then what happens if I get really ill? Or what happens if I literally get in a car accident? I'm no longer here. What happens if I need to take care of someone in my family long term? There are real life scenarios that could happen. And then there's the other side, the more positive side. What if I do want to just go on a trip for a month with my family, or if I want to go serve in some mission field for many, many weeks at a time? And then my favorite, what if I just want to rest?
Right.
And CEOs, entrepreneurs, don't rest well on average. And so one of the benefits of building the business to not rely on you as a founder, as a CEO, is that you can actually take a longer period of rest, which is better for the business in the long run as well. So it's mostly about how the business can be better if it doesn't rely on you. And it just so happens that it can benefit a CEO to take that time away as well.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to, like in my world of continuous improvement, we always say it's process dependent and not people dependent.
Right.
Right. So if the process is in place and somebody leaves, like you said, they get into an accident or they have a family member that they have to care for, that the business doesn't crumble because it's all about the process and not necessarily the person.
Mm-hmm.
I know you mentioned a little bit about music in the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about music and its influence on your life and maybe your, transition, through life?
Yeah, music, I think more than I even realized up until the past few years, music helped me practice and even exercise kind of a creativity muscle, because I was not only learning other people's music, but I was trying to make my own music, or I would rearrange music that was already there. So that was really, really beneficial to me. I have quite a few friends who are also programmers who are musicians, and there's just, I don't know, there's something interesting about those. There's some similarities. I'd love to see a Venn diagram breakdown of traits between musicians and programmers, because it seems like there's a lot of overlap. But the creativity side was something that I just was able to apply to my coding. The way you build chord structures or songs, I would build things with code, Similarly, I feel like my time playing in bands and with different musicians taught me more about teamwork than I realized it was teaching me at the time. I got into a place where I'm working on a website with 6 other people, and I'm realizing, we're kind of all playing supplemental parts, and together we're making a sound that a part none of us would make on our own.
Right.
And so just being in a band atmosphere, I think taught me some things that I didn't realize I would be able to apply in different places. And then I just love analogies, and music brings me some wonderful opportunity for analogies and teamwork. Some of which are cheesy and at the surface, where we might talk about harmony. Right. We should harmonize better together. But genuinely, there are some really great analogies that I just appreciate my musical kind of background and even upbringing that have helped me learn lessons in new or different ways as a business owner or as a leader.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you could talk about timing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, like you said, if you have one instrument, you're just having that sound. If then you have 5 different instruments and they all come together, you would never get that sound from just one person, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Do you have any recommendations or advice for people that want to start their own business or they have a dream? Any type of recommendations?
So I think I have to start with a caveat. My business is very low-cost startup. My experience has just been with one business, basically, for the most part, and my own. And it's not like opening a restaurant where there's a lot of capital involved, there's a lot of upfront risk. I basically was building websites. So if I've got a laptop or something, I can go try it.
Right.
So quick caveat that's sort of my experience and even the lens that I tend to look through. But my first piece of advice is find a simple way to test if it can be a business. In my example, it meant try to build a website for a friend. And my earliest projects were for musicians, friends who were trying to put a CD together and get it on, I don't know, MySpace or whatever
Right.
they were trying to do. And I would try to provide them a service and charge them and see if it was valuable to them. And so that's kind of almost the foundation of the business. Bring value to a customer. They'll pay you.
Right.
Did it work? Try it again.
Yeah.
Repeat.
Yeah.
So even if I think about like cutting grass as a business, I might just think, well, maybe I can get into landscaping. Well, I'm going to get a tool, the two primary tools I know I can do a great job with, and I'm just going to start knocking on some doors and see if there's some people who I can serve and provide value to. So whatever your version of that is, find kind of the low-cost approach before you invest all your hard-earned money and time into, while you probably still have a day job, test these ideas out. And, I had Focus Lab existed for 3.5, almost 4 years before it was my full-time job because I had other things I had to take care of.
Yeah, I think sometimes people overcomplicate things, or they think like, I'm using, cell phones and stuff to record video.
Right.
People think that you need, this monstrous camera and all this great lighting and all this special stuff to get started. And it's like, no, you don't. And like you're saying, a laptop, a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of motivation. Hey,
that's right.
Do you need a website? Let me write it for you, and then just pay me for it.
Yeah.
And then that's the beginning.
Yeah.
That's great. What about creative ways to come up with new ideas? Do you have any special ways that you or, the team come up with new ideas?
So I'm going to give 2 different answers or examples. The first does not require that you have any customers. Scratch an itch. If there's a problem that you see somewhere, even if it's not your own problem, go and solve it, even if it's for free. So, for example, for me, in our earlier years, we did a lot of coding and programming. I was a part of message boards where I would learn. I would also post questions about technical things and people would help me. Well, I would also keep an eye out for other people saying they had problems. And I would read those threads and say, can I think of a way to fix this? Just as an experiment.
Right.
And then I would do that. I would just go and write the code that fixed their thing, and I shared it with them and anyone else who wanted it. Said, hey, I think this probably works. And that was a way to force myself into creativity, to creating something, to experimentation. I didn't have to come up with the idea. Somebody else had it, and it was actually going to serve a purpose of some kind. And so that was a habit that I had. I did that many, many times. It was super valuable for me and great. I'm glad it was valuable for other people too.
Right.
If you have customers, what we tend to do these days is just ask them questions. We make sure that what we provide them actually did what we hoped it would. We've learned a lot by getting no's in those questions along the way. Sometimes people say, oh, actually, we didn't really know what to do with what you gave us in this little area of what you did. So we'll say, oh, okay, well, that's only about 5% of what we gave you, but we want to change that. We want to iterate a little bit so that the next time all of it was exactly what you needed, kind of a thing.
What about any role models that maybe you have from the past or even present? And the importance of a role model.
Yes, I have maybe a little bit of an unconventional answer. Many of my role models are not entrepreneurs. And I think that kind of maybe goes a little bit back to how I talked about my faith being a little bit even more foundational than some of the other topics. And so most of my role models are people who, whether they're in entrepreneurship or not, have a deep commitment to loving people and what they do. And whether they work in manufacturing, in a plant somewhere, whether they are working at a grocery store, whether they're working in a call center, or maybe they're an entrepreneur, maybe they own a business, whether small or large, if they have a commitment to just loving and serving people, those are people who I will probably be more drawn to from a role model perspective than people who show up on the covers of magazines who I don't know the person behind them per se.
Yeah.
An example would be Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers.
Right.
He is, in all of the things I've listened to and read and heard so far about people talking about their experience with him, a common theme is that they say he actually is that way. Because there's this question where you're like, is that a character?
Right.
Is
when
that
the camera's on or off, right? All
and,
the time. And
if somebody who has some notoriety to them, some stage that they are on, in a sense, and you keep hearing like, no, they're actually like that. That stands out to me, and I'm like, what? Okay, I want to read about that person. I want to learn from that person. And Fred Rogers is a great example because so much of what he did was just about love, and it wasn't in like a overbearing way. It was still central though to what he did. So Fred Rogers is one who just quickly comes to mind. He was not an entrepreneur. He didn't build a business. He just tried to work with kids and help. Not just kids, but just to help people.
And just through his actions, right? Like on and off camera, like they say, actions speak louder than words. And just watching somebody, you can see like, wow, that person's like the real deal.
Yeah.
Like they're not acting because you can't act that long.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Another name, just briefly, a guy named Dallas Willard. He's a philosopher. He passed away in 2010-ish, somewhere in there. But he was in his 60s or 70s when he passed away, and he was one of those people who had a stage, if you will, in the academic and philosophical Christian arena. And so in a small subset, he was really popular, and he's the kind of person who, when you hear people describe him, they would say, he's actually the way that he was behind a microphone. Like, that was actually all him. Even down to his family describing him and saying, like, yeah, that was Dad, or that was Dallas. And so people like that who are just full of integrity, where they are the same person regardless of how many followers they had or however much notoriety they had, that really speaks to me from a motivation perspective and just kind of a staying focused perspective. So
right. I guess kind of going off of that then, when we're talking about business and customers, the importance of the business-customer relationship and making sure that a customer is not just another number or dollar sign. That's got to be really important.
Yeah.
Especially if you want a customer to give you good reviews, or if you want them to be a customer for life, right? I mean, can you speak to kind of that importance? Because I think too many times people are treating clients like they're just another number. They just want to get them in and out the door, no matter if it's at the grocery store or if it's, a brand agency company,
right,
or any company.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the simple answer is I just try to flip it and say, do I want to be treated like a number? I don't typically want to be treated like just another number or just a person with some money to give for a thing. And we don't want to treat our customers like that. We know that there is value in treating people like humans. And we do that both with our customers and with our staff. Like, we have a very person-centric model, to the point where we don't even have HR in any of our job titles. We have a person who does HR functions, but I just don't even like the term human resources.
Right.
So we call it people operations. And, I think words matter. And in a lot of cases, if I'm just looking at customer or an employee as a resource, what is that going to do to kind of my mindset over time? I want to be treated like a person, so I'm going to treat each person.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah. Like, if you think of a human as a resource, right? A reusable resource. Like, that begins to kind of make you, no, am I? I'm not a resource. I'm a person.
I don't want to be a resource.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You've talked about S.A.U.C.E. You've mentioned S.A.U.C.E. I think like on maybe LinkedIn or the internet before. Can you talk about what's the S.A.U.C.E.? Yes,
so it's very related to what we just touched on with engaging with people as people. This is not revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination, but a couple of years ago, we just decided that high quality work was not enough to make us stand out from other excellent agencies that are out there. We did think that we might have a strength in how we serve our customers that other agencies might lack. So that was the catalyst to this idea. But where that took us is a deeper emphasis on customer experience than we have had in the past. So we've been working on it we've been focusing on it for a couple of years. And it eventually grew into this acronym, S.A.U.C.E., which stands for Seek to Achieve Unforgettable Customer Experiences. So our theory was, if customers work with us and leave having experienced something unforgettable, they're more likely to buy from us again, tell their friends about us, and maybe some other things that would be helpful too. That's the bottom line mentality. We also feel like to create an unforgettable experience, we're going to have to know them better. We're going to have to serve them better. So there's just a lot of good that could come from a focus on S.A.U.C.E. And it just so happens that the word itself is used in the way, like, people talk about having a secret sauce. So we were like, this works. We could really lean into this. And so we have, and we measure this. We've determined how we're going to measure it. It is literally the most prominent metric goal that we have in our entire organization is S.A.U.C.E. So it's really, really ingrained into our team, into our culture, into our processes, and it's really important that we create these unforgettable experiences.
So can you talk about journey and maybe its necessity in your life? I know, like, with my young kids, I try to teach them about the journey, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
And, like, sometimes you have to have lows to know what highs are. Yeah. Right? To really appreciate things in life, or along that journey. Say, like, success is not overnight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's my perspective on success. It's almost circular in how I think about it, but my definition or perspective on success is that if I define success as still being in the journey, then I'm good. Because I'm not trying to aim for any kind of finish line necessarily. And so the journey is always bumps and curves and surprises. I can't recall where this originated, but I've seen this graph, maybe you've seen it online, or this kind of imagery where it says, like, there's a starting point kind of low and to the left, and then it goes up and to the right, and there's a finish line. It says entrepreneurship, and it's like a straight line,
right.
up and to the right.
Right.
But then it says reality, and it's it's all jagged, and there's, like, depending on which version of it you see, maybe there's like a shark pit, and there's like lava flowing everywhere, and there's tons of ups and downs, and then there's still the finish line at the end.
Right.
So I think it's really important to know that it is a journey for starters, and then just in the sake of maybe time, I'll say, I think it was John Acuff who I heard say this, that you also have to know that other people are on their own journeys, and you can't compare your middle to someone else's end, or your beginning to someone else's middle. because we love comparison.
Right.
And to some of us, it drives us in sometimes healthy ways even, but like it's dangerous. And we have to just know we're on our journey, other people are on theirs, and they don't need to look the same, and they probably won't.
Right.
So yeah, ups, downs, lefts, rights. It is always a journey. And you know, I could say literally as we record this, we're in one of the best seasons we've ever been in as a business. Rewind 12 months, even 18 to 24 months. We've been on the struggle bus for a little while, man. We've had some tough stuff after some great years. So like we've gone through some things. But it is worthwhile for sure.
Right. Because I mean, that's what life is seasons, right? It's not always going to be, you know, the summertime and the crops are all plentiful, right?
Yeah.
Kind of finishing it up, can you talk about the importance of, or how you would think following your passion and not the money?
Yeah. Passion is life-giving when you're able to sit in it, when you're able to do things that you're passionate about. So for me, I try to make sure that I'm able to spend as much time doing things I am passionate about. And this might not be directly connected to money, but if I go back to the CEO story, it might sound kind of weird that I'm giving up the potential kind of prestige of being the CEO of this agency to be the COO. But I'm much more passionate about what I do as the COO. Predominantly, the way I tend to describe it is that my partners focus on the outside of Focus Lab, the things we deliver to customers, the way we look to the market, those types of things. And I focus on the inside of Focus Lab, on what is it like to work here? How does it feel to be at work? What are our benefits? You know, just the things the processes that allow us to not have to scream with questions about when surprises happen. What is it like to be on the inside of Focus Lab? I'm far more passionate about that. And stepping away from the prestigious CEO title meant that I could step more into that passionate time, that passionate kind of arena. And I really like how Michael Hyatt describes it. He has this thing that he writes about called the Freedom Compass. And he describes the intersection or the overlap between your passion and your proficiency. And he's basically saying you need to spend as much time as you can where you're both passionate and proficient. Because sometimes people are really passionate about things they're not proficient at.
Right.
And so I think it's important to know where those overlap and as best you can design your time and your life to kind of be that. And it's a journey. It's not something you just decide and just get to it. Or rather you arrive to it. But you can really think about what you're passionate about. Am I spending time in that way? Well, if I'm not, how can I spend more time? How can I get closer to that? So it's not always going to be a financial benefit or even like a prestige type benefit. But man, it is so much more fulfilling when you can just live in that passion and not focus on glory or fame or money. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Looking towards more of the inner self than outside, right?
Yeah.
Erik, I appreciate it.
Yeah, man,
Thank
this is
you.
great. I appreciate this.